Martin, welcome to Talk Python to me. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk about static sites and the next big platform for building them here in Python and beyond. So really excited to talk about Zensical. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, pretty much. Zensical.
Zensical. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, I know MkDocs, material for MkDocs has been really, really popular, and you all have made a big splash announcing this new project. So I'm really looking forward to diving into it. Before we do, though, let's just get a little bit of background on you. Who is Martin?
Of course. So, hi, my name is Martin Donat. Most people probably know me as Squidfunk. I've been an independent developer and consultant for the last 20 years now. And I mostly write in TypeScript, Python, and lately a lot of Rust. So I've become a huge fan of Rust, actually. I'm kind of a free spirit, so I love doing my own thing and building products from front to back, basically. So doing the front end as well as the back end. And for the past 15 years, I contributed a lot to open source. As already mentioned, my most popular project so far is material for MkDocs. And it's, well, millions of people basically look at sites that are built with it every day. Yeah, well, and Zensical, my latest project, will hopefully go far beyond that. So we're working very hard on it, and this is why I'm here today. So excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I am as well. And let's just start by admiring your website a little bit.
Thanks.
Brian and I spoke about this over on our Python Bytes podcast, and we kind of just got distracted just staring at the website. It's this beautiful flow of, I don't know, colors. It looks a little bit like a black hole a white wormhole sort of experience. I don't know. What was the inspiration there at this cool design?
Yeah, this is actually a strange attractor. So this is something from physics. I'm not
Yes.
very proficient in physics, but those strange attractors I had a fascination for them for a very long time. And they follow very simple rules. So it's just three equations that define how the points move in three-dimensional space. And yeah, but still with those simple rules, a very complex shape can emerge. And this is for us actually symbolizes the process of evolving ideas through writing. So if you have slightly different conditions from the start, it's still orbiting around the same shape, but it might look a little bit different. And there's actually, I can share this now, there's actually a little Easter egg. Nobody has found it so far. So if you hover over the homepage on zensical.org with the mouse in the left bottom corner, you can actually change the coefficients of the animation. And if you do
Look
this,
at that.
so you can click on them and then you can use your cursor.
I'm changing beta. We're running beta 0.22 right now.
So and
it really does change it. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it takes a little time, but if you change the coefficients in a specific way, it might be completely chaotic and become unstable. So this is what I really find fascinating about those strange attractors. Yeah, and it's also the inspiration for the logo. So we're building on this image a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I thought it was just a cool design. I didn't realize it had all this meaning and actual math and physics behind it. That's super cool. Yeah, I love chaos theory and all of these fractal type of ideas here, and yeah, it's super neat. Okay, so what is Zensical? Why did you build it? Why not just more material?
So there are a lot of questions in there, actually. Maybe let me just start by shortly speaking about what it is. So in very simple terms, it's a tool to build beautiful websites from a folder of text files. So you just write in Markdown and can generate a static site. You don't need a database for it. So to those who that don't know what a static site is, you don't need a database or server. It's just static HTML, which means you just pip install Zensical and you're ready to go within a few minutes. And it's fully open source, MIT licensed. And to maybe explain a little bit more about static sites. So the big benefit of it, you can host it for free in many places, for instance, on GitHub Pages or Cloudflare, and they're secure and fast by default because there's only static file serving involved. And Zensical, so we try to make it pretty with a modern design, many built-in features, and fun, according to the feedback of our users, which is kind of unusual for writing documentation. So, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And if anyone's tried to manually create a static site, it quickly becomes a challenge if you're just writing. I say, hey, it's only 5 HTML pages. I can just write the HTML, you know what I mean? But, well, what if you want to have common navigation? Or you want to change the look and feel, then like, oh, well, now I've got to go edit that in 5 places, right? And so if even just basically beyond one page, having something that generates the static site it's super valuable, right? Because it'll generate the wrapper navigation, the common CSS, the footer, all those kinds of things, right?
Yes, so it depends on what you want to do. So of course, if you have a small site, like a personal website or so, you can just write basic HTML if you're proficient in it. For instance, the users of Material, only 7% of them are front-end developers. We will dive a little bit into how Zensical relates to Material later. And what Zensical is being used for primarily is for documentation. So it builds on the docs as code philosophy, which means that you treat your documentation exactly like your source code. So you primarily write documentation. You don't want to fight front-end development problems. You just want to keep the content, get the content out. And with this docs as code, what the cool thing about is you can use the same tools and processes and workflows like you use for code, like versioning and PRs to make changes. And the adoption is growing really fast, actually, among companies in recent years, and they're moving away from proprietary tools to open source solutions. So Zensical is for you, or a static site generator in general is for you if you just want to get your writing out. And of course, you can also customize it and make it pretty as you want, but you don't necessarily need to know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that's quite practical.
And you talked about writing, and you even have your metaphor with strange attractors. I personally find if I'm just in a clean space where it's really just about the ideas, I don't have to worry about the design. It makes it so much easier to just focus on the actual writing. You're in a Markdown editor. My favorite is Typora, but you can use whatever variety that you want, right? And you're just there. You're not worried even hardly about the formatting of the Markdown. You're just writing. And I find that very a good creative space, I guess.
Yeah, that's the beauty of Markdown. So you can just write, as you mentioned, and how you in the end use it, you can still decide that afterwards. So if you want to build a website, if you want to create a PDF of it, if you just want to use it for internal note taking or so, and this is the big benefit of Markdown, as it takes away a lot of the headache of having to remember a lot of markup in order to get your ideas out of the door.
Can you actually put markup in it if you need to? For example, maybe you need a particular image, 2 of them side by side that are links, and you want them to open in a new tab if somebody clicks them. Can you set it into basically an unsafe mode and let it do embedded markup?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, it's possible. You can just use HTML within Markdown. We currently depend on Python Markdown, which we inherited from Material for MkDocs. We are gradually moving towards Common Mark, which, so just as a context, Python Markdown has some oddities when you use HTML within Markdown. For instance, it won't replace relative URLs correctly. This is like an annoying thing. But once we move to Common Mark, we will also have predefined components that you can use, because you can't express everything more complex things in plain Markdown. So there are only things like you can make text bold, you can have lists, tables, etc. But if it's more complex, as you mentioned, aligning to images or having an image with a caption or so, you need basically HTML. And this is possible already. but we will make it much easier in the future. The front-end world already knows this, so they use MDX. They've been using MDX for quite a while, which is a dialect on top of Markdown, which adds more liberty with components and so on. So you can create reusable components that you can use. So it's possible. It's our users already also do it. We also have it on some examples on the documentation, and we will make it much more powerful in the future.
Yeah, very nice. I do think regular Markdown is just a few missing things. I love the simplicity of it, and hat tips John Gruber for creating it. But it's just like I just need to maybe put a class here, or just do a little. If I could just control this a little bit more, then you could basically escape HTML with obviously being careful to not just recreate HTML with square brackets instead of angle brackets, right?
Yeah, there's been a lot of work on Python Markdown. So in Python Markdown, there are some extensions that allow you to add classes at least to block elements. So Markdown, you need to distinguish between like inline and block elements. Oh no, it also works on inline elements like links and so on. But this is special syntax. So Python Markdown is a dialect that is not standardized like Common Mark. In Common Mark, this is not easily possible to add specific classes. But with Common Mark, as I mentioned, you have MDX, which is a de facto standard. I don't know if they've standardized it already. That allows for much, much more.
Nice. So what is Zensical for? Is this a documentation generating tool? Is it a just open-ended static site generator? What is possible, and what is your goal or your target with this project?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, right now we're focusing on documentation. So because
Okay.
this is the thing we're coming from, but we're building Zensical for much, much more. So our like a stretch goal is to have like a fully fledged knowledge management and documentation solution. There are already a lot of companies that use it internally for knowledge management. Basically, as an alternative to SaaS-based solution like Confluence and Notion, we are aware that for this we need WYSIWYG. So what you see is what you get, a visual editor that is also usable by non-technicals. And if you check out our roadmap and scroll down all the way, you will see it as a stretch goal, which is basically something we're working towards. Because this would actually allow so much more people within organizations to use it. And in general, with Zensical, we focus on 3 key areas that make us different from other static site generators, which is a modern design. So of course, some also have a modern design, but within the Python ecosystem, some options might look a little bit dated or a little bit. So we try to be a little bit more on the edge, actually. Mm-hmm. And it should be flexible and it should be fast. So those 3 things, because the design actually is the thing that people notice first. So what we offer is a design that is customizable, brandable. You have like tons of options with which you can change how navigation is laid out, how you can also change like colors, fonts, etc. And we have a lot of components that make it ready for technical writing. As you mentioned, you just want to start writing. So we have stuff like admonitions, tabs, and one very specific feature that we have is code annotations that we inherited from material for MkDocs, which is quite unique among static site generators, which allows you to put a little bubble onto any line of code. You have to visit our documentation. This is you're currently browsing our the other side.
All right. Hold on. Keep going. I'll get us there.
Right. No worries. And there you have to search for code annotations. So code annotations, which allow you to create a bubble in any line of code. And if you click that bubble, there opens a tooltip. And within this tooltip, you can use any rich content. So you can have lists, any formatted markdown tables, diagrams, basically anything you can use anyway within Markdown. And this is a very popular feature in Material. And so, of course, we brought it over. So users can still use it. So the second thing I talked about is it should be flexible. So what makes Zensical different is we have a modular architecture, or say we're working towards a modular architecture. We're still in alpha, so we're close to finishing the module system. And in Zensical, it's modules all the way down, which means all core functionality is implemented as modules, which is different from other solutions where the plugin system sometimes is more or less an afterthought. So there's a plugin system added with specific hooks, extension points where you can hook into. And this might seem sufficient at first, but in the end, so for us, for instance, MkDocs in the end was a little bit limiting. And this allows you to basically swap, extend, replace all modules. You can use our modules. You can write your own, pull in third-party modules. And as I mentioned, Rust. So don't worry, you don't need to learn Rust. You will also be able to write modules in Python because we are super happy users of Pyo3, which is absolutely amazing library.
And Pyo3 has really become a super important foundation of Python these days. It's almost like the C bindings for C Python.
Exactly. So so and with Pyo3, it allows us to have a Rust runtime. So all of the orchestration and in which order things are run, threading, caching, parallelization, etc. All is happening in Rust, and we will provide Python bindings so that you still can use Python to write modules, and they're still running fast. Yeah. Which brings me to the last point where we're different. We have a very heavy focus on performance. So our goal is to let you start with one page because, of course, all documentation sites, all projects start small, and let you scale that to something like 100,000 pages. How we do it is through differential builds. We have created our own runtime, which is called ZRX. And differential builds mean that we are only rebuilding what changed. So for instance, if you only change the page title, only that page and all instances where the page title is used are being rebuilt. And this means that changes are visible in milliseconds and not minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's super cool. And so I'm presuming the build system itself is Rust-based, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's 100% Rust, yeah.
Yeah. And coming from a Python background, like what was that experience like building that?
Yeah, so that's kind of a tricky question because I'm not really coming from a long history of so I don't have a long Python background. I wrote mainly in TypeScript, and I only started 2021 writing Python. So this is actually the history, how material started and how all of this unfolded. But I've written in several languages. So I also have written in C, Erlang, Ruby, Python, TypeScript. Rust was still extremely hard to learn. So I basically banged my head against the keyboard for a month, wasn't making no progress at all because, fighting with the borrow checker. And once you get past that, and then of course lifetimes and higher rank trade bounds and some other features, I'm now some kind of like 3,000 hours, 4,000 hours in, something like that. It gets really good. So I think Rust is seriously one of the best languages ever made because it allows you to express ideas extremely clearly with extreme clarity. And this is due to the very good type system, of course, and you get bare metal performance. So I find it kind of insane having a language like Rust because it's so easy to write once you're used to it. So you will be very productive and still have bare metal performance. It's completely insane.
Yeah, that's wild. But it's got a little bit of a learning curve compared to like Python or TypeScript or something like that.
Yeah, so I had, I think, 18 years of experience with many languages. As I mentioned, I also did a lot of C, and I still found it very hard to learn.
Yeah,
but it's
but it's worth it.
It's worth it, and my recommendation probably would be to learn it on something that you really care about, so that you want to build, because otherwise you will probably lose the drive since you're running against those walls. Maybe for you it's or for somebody else it's much easier to learn. So maybe it's just I'm a bad example that I needed so long. I don't know, but because after that month it wasn't that I was completely up to speed. So it was just I was making very, very tiny progress, at least progress, because for a month I wasn't like, making progress at all. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. The next show that I'm doing after this one, which actually is in real on clock time, wall time, it's happening in like 2 hours or less from now, is with Samuel Colvin from Pydantic,
Yeah.
talking about Monty, a Python runtime. He and his team are rewriting in Rust, specifically targeting AI. So the Rust theme will continue. It's definitely it caught me a little bit off guard, like how much people love it, but it's also, it makes perfect sense that we want this nice modern language for writing lower level things, even if it plugs into Python, right?
Yeah, so the fun thing is, I also talked to Samuel a long time ago, and he was the one recommending to me to write it in Rust. So
Okay.
yeah,
So it's his fault.
he's one of the reasons definitely I looked into it, and
Nice. Okay.
it made a lot of sense. Also during the time, the progress we're making and so on, and the walls we're hitting, that to reconsider learning Rust, best investment. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. So I want to dig into your component structure and some of those things, but maybe before we do, let's talk about the origins a little bit. So let's talk about how you went from material for MkDocs. Why even change? Why not just more material?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and this is a little bit of a story. So there are several stories in there actually,
Yeah.
because so it's 10 years. I try to go make it as compact as possible while keeping the most important things. So to those who don't know, Material for MkDocs is a very popular documentation framework. It's used by tens of thousands of projects. There are prominent users like AWS, Microsoft, OpenAI. Also, large open source projects use it, like for instance, Fast API, UV, Knative, and it's built on top of MkDocs, as the name says, which is which became one of the most popular static site generators, and it also eventually became my job. So I could make it my job. I could work in open source and earn a living somehow. I'm getting there how that worked. But at some point, we needed a new foundation. We've like kind of outgrown MkDocs because it was not evolving at the pace that we needed. So we began exploring alternatives, and so there's a lot of lessons learned in Material. So let me shortly maybe talk about how it started. Because like it started as a side project in 2015, like many things start, because I wanted to release actually a C library, a zero copy protocol buffers library I wrote called ProtoBluff. But then I realized that it needed more than a README. So I looked at the existing static site generators, which were Hugo, Jekyll, Sphinx, MkDocs, something like that. And they all looked a little bit dated. I'm not a designer, but I wanted something more modern, and Google was pushing material design quite hard for app development at that time. So, and I've also seen it being used in the web. So I thought, well, maybe combine this. I quickly settled on MkDocs. Was easy to use, simple templating, enough for a side project, basically. So it was a side project. Did what most devs do, it checked the license, but didn't do any further due diligence. So even put MkDocs in the name to show the connection, so which is common for themes. And that actually turned out to be one of the biggest decisions I made in my career, since I was basing my complete work on something I don't control. And it shaped the next 10 years of all of the work I was doing, and is actually the reason why Zensical exists today.
I see.
So after I started development on it, I like 9 months later released the first version, instantly got users, a lot of feature requests, and it was a side project. So I was doing client work at the time. As I mentioned, I've been like a consultant and developer, freelancer for 20 years, and I only had Sundays to work on it. So, which at first was sufficient, but the more popular it got, the more maintenance there came. So it kind of crept into my mornings and evenings, and I was doing triage, like answering questions and trying to fix bugs before I went to the client. And it was getting harder and harder to justify in front of my partner, actually, because I was doing it in my spare time. And so I did what eventually all projects that start as side projects and where you don't have the full time to work on it. So what basically happens is you start turning down feature requests, and many open source projects don't cross this line. And for me, it was a first. So and also additionally, so I mentioned before that I started writing Python in 2021. At the time, I was focusing. So I only had Sundays to work on it. I didn't know Python, so I said that, okay, I will focus on the templating stuff. I will do the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all of this, make it beautiful, and try to solve as many problems as possible in the front end. But I won't start learning Python because it wasn't a language that I was using at that time, and I couldn't make the time for it. So that's where I drew the line. And then I
It's probably going to be a fad, that Python thing, anyway.
I don't think so, but
well, at the time in 2015, it wasn't clear that it was going to be as popular as it was, as it is now, right? It started to become popular then, but it's really taken over the world and
absolutely
for a lot of reasons. So
Python, of course, I think one of the main reasons is because it's very popular in the ML community, and all of the LLM AI work that's happening and so on made it extremely popular. So, I also think that Rust is doing a very good job on keeping it that way, because finally you have a very easy way to offload work to native code, which is much easier than fiddling with C and C++ and void pointers and whatever. So as I mentioned, Pirate 3 is just an absolutely amazing library. It's so easy to write Rust code.
I think you're right. I think Rust has really provided an important escape hatch for, I wrote it this way, it's not fast enough. Like, well, this part, we're going to make it as fast as it can be, basically.
Yeah. So,
all right, sorry, I interrupted you. Keep going.
No worries. Yeah, no. So as I mentioned, so I try to keep it basically afloat for the first 4 years. And at the time, I didn't see the potential at all. It was just a theme, not a kind of product or so. But yet I felt responsible and kept on maintaining it. And my developer friends didn't understand why I was doing that. So, but for me, it was like, well, it was kind of cool because I had a growing project. I had no immediate plans. I don't know. Let's see where I can take it. And and with this steady and slowly growth over years, then companies and organizations started using it. So they were basing their public-facing documentation on me, like the guy that maybe works on this project on a Sunday. And yet I felt responsible enough to trying to fix the bugs reported as quickly as possible. Then in 2020 actually came the turning point. So when I was working on version 5 of it, I shared my progress publicly as I did before, and somebody mentioned a donate button. And I think the wording was something so that I can order pizza to survive the long Sunday coding sessions. But I heard from another developer who did this on his project, successful project for 5 years, a donate button, and he made $90. So I immediately said that's not going to work. But I said, let's try an Amazon wish list. I just put some stuff on there, and maybe if somebody thinks my work is useful, then he can order me, like, make me a present, send me a present. So, and I basically received everything on that wish list. It was completely insane. So there were 2 consecutive days that felt like Christmas. I even put I put some, books, but then also single malt. I love Scottish single malt. There was a whiskey that cost $120, and I received that as well. So it was like, what's happening? And that led me to start thinking actually about demographics. That I needed to better understand the audience of material for MkDocs. And I did a poll, and the results were absolutely eye-opening. I mentioned before, 7% only of users are front-end developers, which means, and material is a front-end heavy project. So I kind of had an edge there in the Python space, because it's based on Python. So front-end developers that write in JavaScript, they rather go for something like Docusaurus or React-based or whatever. And technical writers were quite happy with the project. I didn't know even technical writers existed, so I had no clue that this job, that this is a job. because I thought at the time, and it's in hindsight completely naive, of course, I thought that as a developer, you need to write the documentation, you know? So I learned about that and accidentally built a product for technical writers. And by the way, when I say product, I mean something that is not necessarily something you pay for, but something that doesn't feel engineered. So something that is like polished and designed and that you actually wanna use. And yeah, so I had a product that has like product market fit, but at the time I didn't earn any money off it. So at the same time I read about sponsorware, and this I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it's like a new model of monetization for open source. At the time it was quite new, so that you can get paid for your work. So some developers, for instance, they sell course material or access to gated content or code or nothing at all. So if you have a popular project, you can just try to raise sponsorships from, and some companies are very generous when it comes to open source. And what we did with material was we gave away early access to the latest features to the sponsors, and each feature was tied to a funding goal, and when that funding goal was met, it became free for everyone. So it was like kind of a funded feature development in multiple stages, and that's what I thought
That's
of.
very.
Sorry, yeah.
That's super clever. I really love the idea of providing something for the sponsors, but still not turning it into, well, here's a paid version of our product and here's the open source version. But there's always this tension of how do you reward the people who support you without undermining the open source project, and that's a clever angle.
Yeah, so that's extremely challenging. So as I'm telling this, so this was what I came up with, and I thought maybe it could work, something like that. And again, my developer friends, they said, "Will never work. Nobody will pay for open source. You're insane." Spoiler alert: it did work, and in the end, we made 200K a year of it, and could build a team and everything. So I know in Silicon Valley terms, this is probably minimum wage, but in Europe, it's quite an amount with which you can work very well. And so I started this program in 2020, and it grew steadily, and it finally allowed me to work on features outside of the Sunday. So invest more hours into it, and finally learn Python in 2021. Wrote my first plugin and started hacking the MkDocs features that got turned down, that we upstreamed, but where the maintainers said, it's maybe not a good fit, or we don't have the time for it. And in total, I wrote 12 MkDocs plugins. So it started as a theme, but it turned into a powerful docs framework in the end. And this worked quite well for several years until it didn't anymore. And that's the reason why Zensical then came into being.
So the way it didn't work is that, like, just where you wanted to take it started to diverge from MkDocs, or you couldn't get your changes upstreamed or committed back?
So the thing was that MkDocs was not evolving as we needed it. So historically, MkDocs had a sequence of single maintainers, and as far as I know, all of them worked on it in their spare time because they had regular jobs. And material was evolving quickly because we had funding. We could invest much more time in it. We could then an open source project that is only maintained in the spare time.
Yeah.
And so it was changing too slowly. So we started a lot of discussions on necessary API changes because for many users, material for MkDocs was MkDocs. So we were kind of like the storefront where most of the issues and like bug reports and feature requests came in. Because many people are using material for MkDocs, and with this are MkDocs basically. And the main challenges that we faced were performance and plugin orchestration. I mentioned I wrote 12 plugins, and it's very hard to make them cooperate. And if you look at any popular MkDocs plugins issue tracker, you will find issues that go something like, well, this plugin is incompatible with this plugin. Well, if I change the order of the plugins in the configuration, this and this happens. So and both of those problems were brought to us again and again by the users with which we talked, and so it was coming up a lot. Then suddenly, after 9 years, the original maintainer returned to MkDocs, and we were super optimistic because the project was like maintained again. He also started a sponsorship program. We upstreamed some of our funding immediately and supported his work. So before MkDocs had no way to sponsor them. And the moment this went live, we immediately supported it. And some PRs were finally merged and issues were closed. But yeah, then the works went silent and it started working in basically in the quiet. And 3 months later, we were invited to a video call. We as maintainers so I as a maintainer for material for MkDocs and some other key ecosystem maintainers. And we learned that MkDocs, that the plans for MkDocs 2.0 were completely different from what existed what currently exists, MkDocs 1.x, which primarily means no plugin API and customization via templating alone. So we already knew this is not enough because that's what we've done the first 4 years, where, as I mentioned, I was only doing the templating. And some things you can't just do with templates. For instance, having a tag support where you need to pull in different tags from different pages and then render them on another page or so. So you need synchronization efforts, and you can't do this with templating.
Right.
Yeah. By the way, all of this information is public, so you can read it on the MkDocs issue tracker. So yeah, I'm not telling anything secret or so. Yeah, so it's a completely different direction than the one that we worked on, and we raised objections in the call, and but yeah, still they were dismissed. So MkDocs 2.0, as it looks right now, is incompatible with material for MkDocs. 300 plugins in the ecosystem will become useless, and tens of thousands of projects will be affected. And for us, so we had absolutely no choice than to start building something. So to start make something of this, because at the time we had already 50,000 projects, 50,000 public projects, depending on us. We talking to enterprise users, and we knew that this number is much, much higher. So for instance, one of our professional users, they already also sponsored material. They have 2,500 projects internally. So only one company, and they have a dedicated team of individuals that maintain their customizations on top of material for MkDocs for all of the teams inside the company. It's a very big company. So
yeah,
that's
incredible.
What you could infer from the I could believe it. I couldn't believe it at all. So absolutely insane. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we had no choice. So what we did was we immediately went back to the drawing board with the learnings from the almost 10 years that passed since I started material. We built a lot of prototypes in TypeScript and Python, iterated on them. We did a lot of conceptual work, and realized within weeks what could actually be done with a radically different architecture. Because writing 12 plugins, I know the ins and outs of MkDocs. I know so I had to do a lot of hacks, for instance, to make the block plugin of material work with the way navigation works in MkDocs. The number one complaint, as I mentioned, was MkDocs is slow and it doesn't scale. So like fixing a typo, you're doing a full rebuild, and this can take minutes. So our design work centered exactly around this problem. And after a short while, so we knew exactly what MkDocs should look like. And we didn't want to let our users down. And in essence, we had two options. We know what it should look like. We could fork it, or we could start from scratch. And
right.
Forking is not really possible because of the way how Python dependencies work. So all of the plugins have a dependency on MkDocs. And this means that we would also need to fork all of so without doing black magic with imports, which might not be the best idea. So we would also need to fork all plugins, or all plugins would need to switch to the fork. So this would be like moving an entire city at once, and it's frankly impossible. So, and if we would fork it, we wouldn't be able to realize our learnings that we gained in the groundwork that we did. So we had to start from scratch, actually.
Right. Plus, you'd have to convince the entire community to at least create a parallel package. Because when you pip install that other plugin, it's going to say, hey, PyPI, I need MkDocs.
Yeah.
And now you'd need the forked version, whatever that's going to be called, right? So, yeah, it would be a big battle, wouldn't it? Just technically with, or a community, you'd have to move the community, which is a very challenging thing to do.
Yeah, and so for us, the most sensible thing was to just, we just start from scratch. We make it as compatible as possible. It became quite clear very quickly that we need to optimize for compatibility, because if you create something that is not compatible and that forces users to migrate documentation manually and to do a lot of work to get over to something else, you won't get a lot of adoption. So
Yeah, all you got to
compatibility,
do is think about that 2,500 project team. Like, okay,
exactly.
how do I keep them working with this, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, so what we then did is we had an idea how it should look. Then we started with Rust because it was recommended to us. So it was very hard at first, and it in total it took us 16 months to build all of this. But it was not only writing code; it was also exactly knowing where we want to go, because we're starting fresh. So we better be sure that we are going into a direction where we actually want to go for the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. Depends.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
are really in for this for the long game. So the 10 years that I've been doing this, I see that this is only the start. And we wrote a lot of things from scratch. So the runtime, as I mentioned, it's like the heart of Zensical. It already has something like 15,000 lines of code. A tiny HTTP middleware framework for file serving, because we don't want to. So we also want to make the file server extensible and don't want users to force them into async Rust, and also don't have a dependency on Tokyo. And also like a monorepo management tool for Rust and JavaScript that we also open sourced, which not sure if you've worked with monorepos, but in JavaScript, for instance, there's Learner and it has 800 dependencies. So when you install it,
Wow.
what you pull down is just insane. So we worked a lot on the processes as well, that we can make releases very easy and that we have a good way of working, basically. And we're very careful about our choice of dependencies. So if it's not something that, or let me put it another way, if it's something that you can write quite quickly, actually, and we rather own in order to make changes ourselves, we rather write it from scratch. Yeah,
I think that's a very healthy philosophy. And also, I think this agentic AI world that we're in these days, if you just need one or two functions, and you used to think, well, maybe I'll lean on this, and in your case, a crate, or maybe a PyPI package or something.
Mhm.
But if it's just one or two functions, maybe you really can just write it yourself without much effort, and it saves you so much trouble. I started using pip audit for a lot of my projects, and I would say for my bigger projects, every 2 weeks I get at least one CVE vulnerability notification for something I'm using. I'm like,
Mm.
but here's the thing: it's in a situation of that, probably a piece of code or functionality of that package that I don't even use or care about. So it doesn't really apply to me, but then I've got all these, like, here's an issue, like a latent issue that is in my code
Yeah.
that I'm going to have to figure out and deal with. But it's because I've taken in so much as part of this package, where if I had just written the one or two functions, then it'd be fine. You know what I mean? I think
Absolutely.
I think things are swinging back a little bit from, like, let's just pull in everything because it's going to help us, to, like, well, maybe not everything.
Yeah. And also you can't just change things easily, and you depend on other APIs. So for instance, one of the reasons why we choose to build a lot of things from scratch is that we want to control the public APIs. So the worst thing for us would probably just be to export a third-party API that we're using as part of our public interface, because it's Rust. So it would mean that if this public API would change, the entire ecosystem would break. So we're very careful what APIs we expose, and rather wrap it in order to be safe, so we can replace
I see.
things, keep things replaceable.
So maybe you have the philosophy of it might be okay to use this crate, but we don't exchange its types as the public, as part of our API or something along those lines.
Yeah, we don't expose it. So we,
Yeah.
I've in some instance, the wrappers that I wrote are identical to the types that we use from another crate. But by using our own types or just wrapping them, because in Rust, the nice benefit is you have zero cost abstraction, so all the code is monomorphized inline, so you don't pay for wrapping code. That's the absolute crazy
Yeah.
thing. So it's you can finally create a really clean architecture without runtime penalties if you do it right.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah. 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 Very interesting. So you can see I have this huge list of topics we're basically just barely cracking the surface. But I'd like to go back to this components. Wrong search there. You have components. That was in the other part, wasn't it? Let's just talk through some of these things here. So you've got like admonitions, buttons, code blocks. Like, let's talk through some of the building blocks, I guess, that you think are interesting here.
Yeah, so I think most of the so if you're not new to technical writing, most of the stuff shouldn't be quite new. So like admonitions, code blocks, stuff like that, you've probably seen, or data tables. Diagrams are just Mermaid diagrams, as they are as you can use them on GitHub. One of the like the flagship features in Material and now Zensical, as I mentioned, like code annotations, which is a part of code blocks. Otherwise, we also have an icon and emoji integration. So you can use one of, I think we have something like over 10,000 icons now with a quite simple syntax. That's not standard Markdown. That's the problem. So that's like a Python Markdown extension. And we're working on moving this over to Common Mark and finding a way to migrate this over. Because right now it's Zensical uses Python Markdown for compatibility with Material for MkDocs, which means that for Markdown rendering, we need to go through Python. And this is a temporary limitation that we have, because I mentioned we are focusing really hard on compatibility. And all of those components will also be, of course, be available within our Common Mark solution that we're working on, that we will ship later this year. But right now, of course, you can use them as they're mentioned on our documentation, and we will, of course, provide automated tooling to get them over to Common Mark.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting that you've got to not just consider the API and the syntax and stuff, but maybe even the same parsing engine to have this strong compatibility, right?
Yeah, we can even read MkDocs YML configuration. So you can build an MkDocs project with Zensical as it stands. The thing that we currently don't support in its entirety is the plugins from the ecosystem. We already support some plugins. For instance, the MkDocs strings plugin. The author is also part of the Zensical team now, with MkDocs strings being the second biggest project in the MkDocs space. So we're very happy to have Tim on board. And several other plugins. But as I mentioned, so Zensical uses modules. So what we will do in the end is we will still always be able to read MkDocs configuration and map the plugin configurations to equivalent Zensical modules. So the logic will be completely rewritten, but you will be able to migrate your project with a command. That's our goal, because has so much work been going on into projects built with Material and MkDocs. So we need to make it easy for users and organizations to switch. And this is the main part we're working on in 2026.
I think it's critical, right? If your absolute best users, like that big company, but many others, of course, they're not going to rewrite everything. Well, maybe they will, but many of them won't rewrite everything. They'll just use an old version and grin and bear it as long as they have to. You know what I mean? Like this idea of doing it from scratch. But if you provide a path for them, that's very easy. Then all of a sudden, they get this way better experience, right? I can only imagine, the build speed helping out the bigger projects the most.
Yeah, And the compatibility part is one of the hardest engineering parts, actually. So that you have to think about that, because we don't want to paint ourselves into a corner. So we need to think about where do we want to go, but how can we go there faster right now without making sacrifices in a way that we can't, in the end, replace things. And we have a pretty elaborate plan how to do all of this. And so we're working very hard on it to make it. So right now you can just use material, of course. You can keep using it. Or if your site already built in Zensical, you will have better speed and the modern design and the better search. So the search has been completely rewritten from material to Zensical. It's currently integrated. It's integrated with Zensical, and we will open source it as a dedicated open source project. It's called Disco. So you will also be able to use the search in other projects. And for just as a number to get a feel for it, it's 20 times faster than the search in material for MkDocs.
Wow.
So it's a ground up rewrite, and we actually started working on the search before we started working on Zensical.
Yeah, I noticed how nice the search was when I was playing with it. So is Zensical.org itself built in Zensical?
Yeah, of course. And it's
Yeah.
actually built with an MkDocs YML because we're dog fooding. So you can also build it with MkDocs with material for MkDocs. The project layout is exactly the same.
Yeah. I find that there's just a bunch of static sites that seem to I don't know what's going on with them, but their search is really bad. Either they've just integrated some kind of Google thing where it says site : and they use your URL and then the search, which is a real bad experience, or you go search and it sits there and it spins and then eventually it pulls up. So it looks like you are pre-computing these types of things or something with your search engine, or have got some cool data structure to make that fast, right?
Well, it's not one cool data structure. That would be great because then everybody could just use it. But no, so
A series of algorithms and so on.
Several months of work went into the search.
Of course.
So it's a project of its own, as I mentioned. It's also completely modular. And the reason why most of the search engines that are out there that are open source, so like the libraries that you can use, not services you have to pay for, that they don't provide results that are really relevant or is that they use BM25, which is like the standard bag of words ranking algorithm for information retrieval, and this doesn't nicely pair with autocomplete. So what you get is you start typing and you get a lot of dancing results because and also if you add further documents to your index, the balancing will be off because it's the relevance is computed based on the occurrence of a word in the entire corpus. So you add a new document, those weights change again. The search that we have, we of course as a baseline also have a BM25 implementation, but the implementation you're seeing is a tie-breaking implementation, which provides much better accuracy, and you can configure it. So tie-breaking means we first look into the title of the document, then and see if we have matches, then how many matches, then where they are, then we look into the in the path, and then in the body of the document, and so on. All of this is configurable, and this is also why we believe that Disco alone will also be a very interesting project for other, for instance, static site generators to integrate. And you asked about like pre-computing. So no, this is a search from the documents. We build a search index, which is a strapped-down version of the HTML that is rendered when you load the page. It's one JSON that we ship to the client, and for most pages, actually, this JSON is below 1 megabyte. You can GC it, so compress it. Then it's something like 200K, and you have extremely fast search on the client with no cost. And so we believe that for 90, 95, maybe 99% of documentation sites or sites in general, this client-side search is basically the way to go because it's fast and it doesn't require you to pay for anything. And there are several SaaS-based services that can be extremely expensive when you do the math. So you only need to use a server basically when the index becomes too big to ship to the client. And we're also working on that, by the way.
Okay, that's really cool. You could shard the index or something like that, right? I suppose. Like you could say, we're going to have 26 index bits, and if the word starts with an A, do you pull that piece down or something? But yeah,
Yeah,
lot of cool aspects.
yeah. It's not that simple, but there are also some other some other interesting solutions. Like
Yeah.
PageFind is a pretty interesting library. It does a completely different approach, but it's not as snappy as the search that we ship to the
Beautiful.
client.
Yeah. I
so
use
it's-
PageFind for my personal website, which is a static site.
Yeah, it's also a great solution, but you some things you won't be able to implement in PageFind properly because
Sure.
So it's with software, it's trade-offs all the way. So
Well, I'm already thinking like I better pay attention to Disco when it comes out. So maybe adopt it for some stuff. Beautiful. Okay, we got a couple interesting questions, sort of following up from the component side of things. Jamsack says, do you foresee community-led templates or themes for Zensical? I know you have like 2 themes that I see, something along those lines, a couple of themes that you can choose now, but what is the theme story, I guess? I want to ask you more broadly.
Yeah, so absolutely. So right now we have only this one theme. We have this variant setting where you can choose like the classic variant, which is when you move over from material for MkDocs, it looks exactly the same. This is also why we needed to keep the HTML as it is, also with the modern design that we provided, and the modern variant, which is the standard for Zensical. Once we move to the component system, we will make it possible to one, use components within Markdown, and two, also create a template engine that is based on components. This will allow us much faster rendering because, for instance, if you render the header for a site, it's a lot of HTML because there's the search box in it and some other stuff, but only the title changes. So we will also make the rendering differential as part of the build. That's the plan. And with this, we will also make it open to theme developers, of course. So there will be the packaging for instance, compilation of Sass styles or TypeScript or so will be part of Zensical. So you don't need to pre-compile the theme like we needed to do for the last 10 years for material. So it will have a proper asset pipeline. It will have a proper process to install themes. All of this is planned, but right now we focus on feature parity. So in order to make it possible for more users to migrate right now.
That's really interesting that you would deliver the theme as basically its original source, not its rendered, compiled or transpiled version, right? To keep it, I guess, it's a part of the Zensical build step, right?
Yes, exactly, because we had a lot of requests for something like, hey, can we change the media queries a little bit because the sidebar disappears too early for my taste, and this is not so. For this, you have to go through the compilation step again and basically fork the theme and recompile it. We want to make this configurable so that you can use configure the theme and build it, and it just works. So this it just works. That's the thing we're working towards. Make it as simple as possible.
Yeah, very cool. Let's maybe, I'm getting short on time here, maybe wrap up our chat talking about 2 things. The future, where are you going? You talked about compatibility being a big part of things going forward in 2026, but also sustainability, right? You had all these great supporters for material for MkDocs, which you must have just been absolutely thrilled to realize how successful that was, right? I mean, going from, I'll put up a wish list and then actually people love this. I can put all of my energy into it. I mean, I know how great of a feeling that is, right?
That's completely insane. And when I started it, I would never believe that this would be my job at some point.
Really. Yeah, I feel the same way about the podcast. And it's just, I'm so grateful for it. It's amazing.
Yeah,
so,
I can imagine.
Yeah. But then with this transition to Zensical, how does that change? Does that change anything or what's the story?
Yeah. So
how do you bring that support over to Zensical?
As we don't have a lot of time, I try to explain it as compact as possible. So we are saying goodbye to this pay for extra features. So in Material, you needed to be a sponsor in order to get the latest features earlier. What we will do is everything is open source from the start. So it's for users, it's completely free. And we are shifting our model from the sponsorships to something we call Zensical Spark. Because what we discovered talking a lot to our professional users is that the more we know about the problem space and the better we understand the problem space and the more we can collaborate with them, the more we can, the better degrees of freedom we can provide. So we don't intend to just ship feature, but we intend to create degrees of freedom so that you can adapt Zensical to the processes within your organization, how they work, to the workflows, etc., which are all different, which is all of a very diverse, basically. So Spark is a space where you, as a company, can basically get a seat and together with us shape Zensical as part of high-level discussions where we explore the problem space. We create proposals. So on the website, you have clicked on the Spark section. There's this ZAPs in progress. We call them ZAPs, Zensical Advancement Proposals. It's on the left side. We write very elaborate, detailed proposals on specific topics that we intend to work on. And then with the feedback that we get, iterate on them and create a authoring, like the ideal authoring experience that caters to the most cases possible. Because we want to build Zensical, as I mentioned, like for the very long term and not as just a solution that is opinionated, but that is as unopinionated as possible. And the third thing that you get, besides like those the opportunity to discuss like have high-level discussions with us and create the proposals with us, is of course professional support. So this is also we've been asked for quite a lot by companies. So in Spark, you can basically get our time. You can get direct access to the team. And also we have like those open video calls where we share our progress and where you can get a window of support and we talk about any problem that is keeping you up at night, basically, and stuff like migrations or how do you do this and this in Zensical. And it's been a blast. So we're really happy that the organizations are enrolling into this new model. And we think it could also be a model that might translate quite well to other projects because you get a huge competitive advantage. You know exactly what to build.
Yeah, you're talking to the actual users. They're saying this is the thing that really is hard for us, or you just get, maybe they don't say it, but you see it, right?
Exactly. Yes. And talking to the users is the best thing you can do. So what we learned from those, from the many times we talked to them, is always something like, "Wow, we never would have come up with this."
Yeah, incredible. Well, congratulations on the success for Material for MkDocs and then this new project. I'm very excited to see it coming along, and it looks like it's going to be great. Maybe a final call to action for people, like, can they go ahead and start using Zensical? If they're interested, what do they do? So on.
Yeah, of course. So you can, we mentioned Material for MkDocs a lot, and this is because we are coming from this direction. So it means if you have a Material for MkDocs project, you should definitely try out Zensical and see if you can build your project. But if you haven't used it, you can also just jumpstart a new project. It has a lot of built-in functionality already. You get like all of these components that we talked about, free search that you don't have to host, a very modern static site that is great on mobile. So just give it a try. And we have a newsletter, so where we once a month share the latest updates, and that might also be worth checking out. Yeah, and otherwise, we'd be happy to see you to get any feedback. Also, by the way, we also have a public Discord, a community Discord, which is growing very well. So if you have any problems or so, then you will get help there. Yeah, would be great to see as many users as possible, of course, and shape this future of Zensical together with all of you.
Yeah, fantastic. Martin, thanks for coming on the show. Congrats on the project.
Thanks for the invitation, and happy anytime to come back.
Yeah, sounds good.